Hello friends, I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope everything is good and great and wonderful. Everything here is fantastic. When I got my Kindle 2 weeks ago, quite a few people asked, what are you going to read first? And at that time I didn't have a solid answer. I was reading, I don't know, I probably reviewed it last week, whatever it was. Oh, the Mistborn stuff. So I was reading the Mistborn stuff, and I was hoping to get through that pretty quickly so I could start reading on my Kindle again. And so I posted a couple of polls, or not polls, but just questions on my Twitter, suggesting, or asking for suggestions. Man, I'm all over the place. I wanted to know what your favorite fantasy was that's been published within the last 5 years. And I saw a couple of recommendations for a book called The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, or Kuang. I don't really know how to pronounce it, but I'm going to say Kuang. And I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. Well, first, I attempted to read Nevernight, and we already talked about, I don't think I could ever finish that book. So that was the first thing I attempted to read, did not finish it. So the first thing I finished reading on my Kindle was The Poppy War. And I just finished it this weekend, and so I wanted to give you some thoughts. Now, The Poppy War is a book set in a fantasy setting that is very closely related to China. And the book talks a lot about history that is very much Chinese history. That's the setup. That's the world that this book exists in. And I saw a lot of positive reviews for this book, and so I was excited for it. Unfortunately, it didn't. I enjoyed the book. I enjoyed it enough to finish it, even though I was frustrated at it. I finished it. And it works on a few levels, but for me it fell apart in one crucial level, and I'll tell you, as I've been attempting to learn how to write, one of the things I have learned from quite a few authors and people who teach writing is the first act of your book, the first few pages of your book are a contract to the reader. They tell your reader, here's what you're going to expect from this story, right? And the first few pages of this book were awesome. It's about a girl who was a war orphan, who was adopted by a family that didn't want her. They abused her. They used her as labor for their shop, which was I don't know what the shop was supposed to be, but it was really an opium house. They sold opium or poppy. And she was just abused, beaten, never in places where it could be seen, that sort of stuff. But she was smart, and she was a fast learner. And in the very, very beginning of this book, the family has planned to sell her to a merchant as a bride. And he's an old guy, and he's going to, you're going to have children. It's going to be excellent. And, we're going to unite these two families. And essentially, we're going to get wealthy because you're going to go be this dude's bride. And I think at this point, she's like, I don't know, 12 or something. I don't know how old she is, but she's young. And she's like, no, I'm not doing that. So she sets about trying to study for I believe it's called the Keju test in this, which is kind of the civil service test in actual China, which is basically everybody tries to test into university. So she decides she's going to do this. And essentially, everybody's like, you can't. Like, there's no possible way you could pass this test. Most prestigious families, their children study from the time they're born to pass this test. There's no possible way. She goes to her tutor. He's like, you can't do it. And she's like, yes, I can. Here's a book. I've only had it for 3 days. Open it and ask me any passage. I've memorized the entire text. And so he tests her, and she had. And he's like, okay, maybe you can. So she spends the next few months studying, and there's 27 texts, and she memorizes all of them and stays awake and burns herself to stay awake. And she goes and gets top of her province. Oh, so part of the thing was, even if she passed this test, her family wasn't going to pay for her to go to university. They couldn't afford it. But she says, but if I can get into Sign-Guard, which is like the prestigious military academy that all the warlords' children go to, it's free tuition. But in order to get into Sign-Guard, you have to be like the top from your province, maybe the top two. So she takes the test. She thinks she fails. Of course she didn't. Of course she was number one. She, passed the test with flying colors, and off she goes to the military academy. Now, at this point, the book has taken a few time jumps. Pacing it instead of sticking with her through all of that boring reading, we jump through to the point where she gets to go, and she goes to the academy. And on the way, her instructor or her tutor teaches her a little bit about society because she'd never been outside of her small town. They get to the city, he tells her what to do, what not to do, and she goes off to this military academy. The military academy was awesome. I mean, the whole thing so far, I'm all in on this book. I joined the Marines at 18, so the military academy part was right up my alley, and we quickly start to learn that. Well, first of all, we're like a third of the way through this book, and there's been no sign of anything fantastical yet. There's been hints that there is fantastical stuff, but nobody's seen it. Nobody believes in it. It's basically just tales, lore, that sort of stuff. She goes to the academy, and she ends up meeting this lore master, this lore teacher, who he has never taught anybody, apparently, at this school. He's just this, goofy, drunk, high, opium-addled, master who has no students. Nobody ever pledges to his class. He just, is aloof. She ends up meeting him because she gets kicked out of her... she starts some fights. She gets kicked out of her martial arts class, and she can't take it anymore. So she starts training in this lore master's opium garden, and he shows up one day, and then he decides that he's going to teach her martial arts because she's not allowed to train with the other students. He starts teaching her like ancient forms, not the dumbed down military version of martial arts, but the ancient forms of martial arts, so that she can beat the other students. And in that process is when we finally get to see a bit of magic happen. And that is, he goes, they're sparring, and she's deflecting everything and pushing the key away and all that stuff. And then he goes to hit her one time, and she realizes that she's not going to be able to deflect this punch, so she has to absorb it, and something happens, and she does absorb it, and she's expecting to, be knocked out, but what ends up happening is the floor tiles beneath her shatter or crack. And both he and her laugh, and he said, "Oh my God, you've never, So we get to see that like mystical martial arts moment that's in samurai movies, and I'm really in. Like, yes, cool. This is going to be a samurai movie in a book about a girl who's badass, and I'm all in on that. And it very quickly devolves from there. This girl is this beaten, downtrodden girl who has this insane drive to become a general in an army, to be somebody strong and powerful. She learns that she has some sort of innate ability with mysticism, and she starts studying under this lore master. And now the book takes big time jumps, 1 year time jump, 2 year time jump. She's not learning much. He's not taught her how to call down the gods, which is how magic works in this world. They have to go consult with the 64 deities, and they can call them down and use their power, but her master won't let her use it. And we jump ahead a whole bunch. We skip all of the learning that she's done, which is I was so excited to see some of that, but we didn't get to see any of that. And we head straight to the big bad guy who's attacking the country, and that's basically Japan. It's like an island nation that just kind of come over and use black powder and rockets and stuff to kind of take them out. And in the middle of all of that, she's fighting. Her master still hasn't let her use any powers. She basically explodes. Not literally, but she calls down a god. Not knowing how she does it, she ends up calling down this god and, setting a fire to everything around her and basically blacking out. And sadly, that moment wasn't that exciting because it was like there was no build up to it. It just kind of happened, and you're like, well, that was fun. And then that's about exactly the halfway point, according to my Kindle. I was like 50%. And then from there, the book jumps again, and now it's the Umbrella Academy. She gets signed on to the 13th Division, this division that doesn't really exist because they're all magic users and nobody wants to, they use them for assassins, but they're not a normal military unit, and they're made up of like a talking barrel of water and an ape man thing, and a boy that can summon fiery wings, and it's just it suddenly the pacing of the book is big time jumps because of war, and suddenly the character that I've been following is no she doesn't really have a purpose anymore. Like, I'm not sure that her character motivations make any sense from the second half of the book on. Her character motivations in the beginning were to be somebody, to like prove that she was going to be somebody. And in the second half of the book, it's revenge, but I'm not really sure revenge for what. Revenge, she had a little bit of a love interest and he dies, or she thinks he dies. And but like they hated each other at school, so as a reader we took such big time jumps. I don't have any reason to believe that she was in love with this boy, and when he gets killed, like she's going to go on revenge for him. She's going to go on revenge for what? For her country that has only, treated her as a peasant? Like, I don't know where her character motivations come from. I don't know where the character motivations of the other members of her unit come from. And that whole portion, that whole segment of people, her 13th division, their character motivations can be completely dismissed because they're all crazy, because they summoned a god and now they can't control themselves. And so their character motivations don't exist. Like, they're just people who go, whatever, I'll blow shit up, I don't care. And it really just fell apart. Now that was, I said a lot of really critical things right there because I felt like, oh man, I was 100% all in on the first half of this book. It was that good. I was totally sold. I was totally wanting to follow this young girl through her path of learning, traditional, what I would consider traditional, probably westernized, traditional, like samurai training, where she's going to learn, to focus her ki and throw people through walls and maybe cast fire or something. But instead what we got was this really weird, eclectic mix of characters who should never spend time together because they're all like crazy and or just unhinged, and they all seem to hate each other but are bonded together because they're the outcasts, and they go to fight a war for a country that doesn't care about them. It's weird. The whole second half is weird, but I enjoyed it. Like, I read it because I wanted to know more. And they go to the mountain where the ancient, where thousands of shamans before them have been sealed away because they can't control themselves because they called down a god. I don't know. I can tell you that had the character motivations, had the pacing, had the mysticism of the first half of the book been what the book was about, this would be a massive glowing review, like just 100%. Because of the second half of the book, read it, you might like it. I mean, this is the first Eastern themed fantasy I've read, and so maybe that's part of it for me, is that maybe I don't understand Eastern fantasy. Maybe that's how it's told in Eastern culture, like these, boy and then suddenly he's a man with power, or a girl and suddenly she's a woman with power. Maybe that's how their storytelling goes. But for me, it was like, this whole second half with these miscreants, a bucket of water and an ape. I don't get it. Like, what was the point of that? I don't. It all devolved for me into something that was a little bit, I don't know. It was like a race to the finish for no reason. Like, it didn't need to race to the finish. This could have been just her first year at the academy, and that would have been awesome. Ultimately, writing style was great. I really love Rin, the main character. I really love Jiang, her lore master, the kind of drunken, opium-rattled, goofy, kung fu master that we've all come to love from countless movies and stories. But again, the second half of the book fell apart for me. I can recommend it if you're interested in fantasy. It wasn't difficult to read. I really enjoy her writing style. She's got a great style. I just wish that the book was more in line with what the first half was. So, I'm not going to say don't read it. Obviously, it's loved, and there's a bunch more books. I will say I'm probably not going to read any of the rest of the books. There's other things on my list that I would rather read. That's where I'm going. So, that's what I have for you today. This was a long one. Sorry about that. Thank you for being here, as always. Thank you for liking and commenting and subscribing and being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I will see you again tomorrow. Today's word you should know to sound smart is conciliatory. It is an adjective meaning actions or words meant to settle or dispute or resolve a conflict in a manner that leaves no hard feelings on either side. If you are not very clever, you should be conciliatory. Benjamin Disraeli, a British statesman and literary figure. Conciliatory. CONCILIATORY.